3 seconds. That's all it took for the entire hearing room to shift. Not because someone raised their voice, not because of an objection, not even because of a direct accusation, but because of a photograph. Before that moment, everything looked routine. The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing was moving exactly the way these sessions are designed to move: structured, predictable, almost procedural in rhythm, questions about Department of Justice policy, discussions about prosecutorial standards, familiar language about independence, integrity, and the rule of law at the center of it. All sat Pam Bondi, composed, measured, prepared. She had done this before, many times. Her posture reflected that experience: shoulders squared, hands steady, answers delivered with the careful precision of someone who understands that every word spoken in that room is recorded, archived, and potentially replayed in a very different context later. For the first stretch of the hearing, nothing broke that rhythm. Then the questioning passed to Richard Blumenthal, and the tone changed, not dramatically, not visibly, but perceptibly. Blumenthal did not begin with an accusation. He didn't start with outrage. He didn't even start with a question. He started with time. "Let's talk about the timeline," he said. That choice mattered. Because in legal settings, timelines are not just background, they are structure. They determine causation, intent, and connection. They transform isolated events into sequences. And once events are placed into sequence, they begin to tell a story whether the witness wants them to or not. Blumenthal leaned slightly forward. "There was a social media post," he continued, "the night before a high-profile indictment." He paused. Not long, just enough. In that post, the president referenced potential legal action. The room stayed quiet. This was not yet confrontation. This was framing, because what Blumenthal was doing was establishing proximity, not physical proximity, not yet but temporal proximity. The closeness in time between a public statement from the executive branch and a legal action taken by the Department of Justice. And then came the question. Can you explain the timing? It sounded simple, but it wasn't, because the question wasn't just about when something happened. It was about whether those events were connected. Bondi didn't hesitate. "Senator," she said calmly, "charging decisions are made independently by the Department of Justice. A clean answer, a practiced answer, and under normal circumstances." It might have been enough, but Blumenthal wasn't finished. He nodded slightly, as if acknowledging the response. Then he added something new. "Let's talk about where everyone was that night." That was the pivot. Not time, space. Because now the question wasn't just when, it was where. "There was a White House cabinet dinner," he said. Again, no accusation, just a statement, a large event. Bondi responded quickly. Dozens of officials present. She was already anticipating where this was going. Scale. Diffuse the focus. If the room is large enough, proximity becomes meaningless. If there are enough people, any suggestion of coordination becomes harder to prove. It was a smart move, but Blumenthal had already prepared for it. Because what he introduced next changed everything. "I'd like to enter into the record a photograph from that evening," and just like that, the hearing shifted. The photograph was displayed on the screen behind him. No dramatic reveal, no theatrical gesture, just an image. But in that image, something became visible that had not been visible before: proximity. Not abstract, not implied. Physical. Blumenthal didn't rush. He let the image sit there. Because images do something words cannot. They eliminate ambiguity, they collapse interpretation. They show relationships that are otherwise easy to deny. "In this photograph," he said, "you are seated 2 places away from the president." The room didn't react loudly, but attention sharpened, because now the argument had moved from theory to evidence. Bondi looked at the screen briefly, then back to the microphone. "Senator," she said, still controlled, "that dinner included a large number of attendees. Seating arrangements at such events are not indicative of private discussions." Again, diffusion, context expansion, make the moment seem smaller than it appears. But Blumenthal stayed focused, 2 seats away. He repeated, "Not louder, just clearer." And this was the same evening, within hours of a social media post referencing potential legal action, followed by an indictment the next day. Now the timeline and the geography had merged: time plus space, sequence plus proximity. That combination is powerful. Because it suggests something without stating it directly. And in legal questioning, suggestion is often more effective than accusation. Bondi adjusted slightly in her seat. Her answer came carefully. "The Department of Justice operates independently of the White House. Any suggestion otherwise mischaracterizes the process." Notice what she did. She responded to the implication, not the specifics. She defended the institution, not the moment. And Blumenthal knew it, because the next question brought it back to something much harder to generalize. "Did you speak with the president that evening about the case?" Silence, brief, measured, but noticeable. Because this question couldn't be answered with a general statement about institutional independence. This required a specific answer. Bondi chose her words precisely. I do not discuss privileged communications with the president. Legally sound, procedurally correct, but strategically it created a gap because refusing to answer is not the same as denying. And in a hearing like this, that distinction matters. Blumenthal didn't challenge the privilege. He didn't argue the point. Instead, he reframed it. Let's talk about what we do know, he said, and this is where the pressure began to build, because now the hearing wasn't about what could not be said. It was about what had already been shown: a post, a dinner, a photograph, a timeline, an indictment, each piece on its own, explainable, together harder to separate. And that is where the real tension in this hearing began, not in what was proven, but in what could not be easily dismissed. Because when time and place align this closely, the burden shifts, not legally, but perceptually. And perception in a Senate hearing can be just as powerful as proof. Blumenthal leaned back slightly, not finished, just pausing, because the next move would determine everything that followed, and everyone in that room understood it. The photograph had done its job. Now came the question of what it meant. The photograph was still on the screen. No one asked to remove it. No one needed to, because by now it wasn't just an image, it was context. And context, once established, is very hard to undo. Richard Blumenthal didn't rush his next move. He didn't repeat the question. He didn't challenge the refusal. Instead, he shifted the frame again. Let's walk through this step by step, he said. That sentence matters. Because when a senator says step by step, what follows is not a debate. It's reconstruction. A reconstruction of events that forces everything into sequence. And once events are locked into sequence, explanations become narrower. Blumenthal raised his hand slightly toward the screen. Evening, he said. Cabinet dinner at the White House. Then a public statement from the president referencing legal action. Then the next day, a high-profile indictment. He paused, not for effect, for clarity. So help me understand, he continued, how the department ensures that these events are entirely independent of one another. That question did something subtle but critical. It didn't accuse. It forced explanation, and explanation, unlike denial, requires detail. At the witness table, Pam Bondi leaned slightly forward. Her tone remained steady. Senator, the Department of Justice follows long-established procedures, she said. Charging decisions are made by prosecutors based on evidence presented to a grand jury. This was the strongest ground she had, procedure. Because procedures don't depend on individuals, they don't depend on conversations, they don't depend on proximity, they depend on process, and Bondi leaned into that. The grand jury operates independently, she continued. It is composed of citizens who review evidence and determine whether probable cause exists, legally correct. Institutionally solid, but Blumenthal didn't move away, because he wasn't challenging the existence of the process. He was questioning the environment around it. And that process, he said, was already underway before that evening. Now the timeline tightened, because if the process was already in motion, the dinner might be irrelevant. But if the timing overlapped, then the question becomes harder. Bondi answered carefully. I'm not going to discuss the specifics of an ongoing or recently concluded investigation, she said. Again, legally safe, but strategically another space where a direct answer did not appear. Blumenthal nodded slowly, not frustrated, not emotional, just methodical. Understood, he said. And then he did something that shifted the pressure completely. He stopped asking about process and started asking about contact. Were you in direct communication with the president that evening? The room went still again, because now the question wasn't abstract. It wasn't about systems. It was about interaction. Bondi's response came in the same controlled tone. As I stated, I do not discuss privileged communications with the president. There it was again. Privilege, a legal boundary, a shield. But like before, it wasn't a denial, and Blumenthal didn't try to break that shield. He went around it. Let me ask it differently, he said. Another pivot. Were any instructions given to you by the president regarding this case before the indictment? That question cut deeper, because it separated conversation from direction. Even if communication is privileged, instructions are something else. Bondi's answer was immediate this time. The Department of Justice does not take instructions from the president on individual prosecutions. That was the clearest statement she had made. So far, direct, firm, institutional. But listen carefully. It answered the rule, not the moment. And that distinction is where Blumenthal stayed. Does not, he repeated, or did not in this instance. A small shift in wording, but a powerful one, because does not is general, did not is specific, and in hearings like this, specifics matter more than principles. For the first time, Bondi paused longer than before, not dramatically, but noticeably. Her hands remained steady, her posture controlled, but the pause was there. Senator, she said finally, the integrity of the department's decisions in this case was upheld through established legal procedures, again process, structure, institution, but not the direct confirmation the question was pushing toward. And now something changed in the room, not in volume, not in tone, but in understanding. Because at this point, everyone could see the pattern. Every question about specific interaction moved toward general principle. Every attempt to connect timeline and proximity was answered with process and independence. Both sides were doing exactly what they needed to do. Blumenthal was building a narrative of alignment. Bondi was reinforcing a wall of separation, and in the middle of that sat the photograph, still on the screen, still unresolved, Blumenthal. Glanced back at it one more time, 2 seats away, he said quietly, not as a question, as a reminder. Then he turned back. I'm not suggesting that proximity proves influence, he continued. And that sentence was critical, because it removed the accusation. I'm asking whether the department recognizes how proximity, timing, and public statements taken together can raise legitimate questions about independence. That was the heart of it, not proof, not violation, but perception, and perception in matters of justice matters. Bondi responded carefully. Public confidence in the Department of Justice is extremely important, she said, and that confidence is maintained by adhering strictly to legal procedures and ethical guidelines. It was a strong answer, but again it returned to principle, not the moment, and Blumenthal let that's it, because sometimes what isn't answered defines the exchange more than what is. He leaned back slightly, not pressing further, not escalating, because he didn't need to. The record had already been built. A timeline, a location, a photograph, a series of questions, and a series of answers that stayed just outside direct confirmation. The chairman began to move the hearing forward, procedural language returned, time limits, next speaker, the rhythm of the hearing reassembled itself, but something had changed because this was no longer just about one indictment or one dinner or one photograph. It was about something larger, what it means for an institution to be independent. And how that independence is perceived when moments like this occur, because here's the reality, independence is not just a legal condition, it's a public trust, and trust doesn't rely only on what is true, it relies on what can be clearly explained. In this exchange, the department's procedures were explained repeatedly, consistently. But the specific alignment of time, place, and communication remained just out of reach, not confirmed, not denied, and that space is where questions live. Not accusations, not conclusions, just questions. And in a Senate hearing, sometimes that's enough, because accountability isn't always about proving what happened. Sometimes it's about showing what cannot be fully answered. The photograph was finally taken off the screen, but by then it didn't matter, because everyone in that room already knew exactly what it showed. 2 seats, 1 night, 1 timeline, and a set of answers that never quite met the question directly.